See, I shall begin from scratch. So you don't have to know things in order to understand what we are talking about, but we will start from the scratch, and as the topic unfolds, then we may come to grips to what we are talking about, and then probably we will also understand its significance with respect to our own life, so that it does not remain just theoretical, but we also learn how what we are talking about is applicable in our life in various kinds of situations. So, there is an interesting story about a scientist and a monkey. The scientist gets hold of a monkey and trying to teach all kinds of things to that monkey. He wants to study the learning pattern of this monkey, how it learns, how it picks up the things. But the monkey is very stubborn, refuses to learn anything. And so finally, the scientist is almost on the verge of giving up, but then he thinks and he says, okay, let me keep some reward for this monkey, so that it will at least learn something. So what he does is that he empties one room, and in that room he hangs a bunch of bananas from the ceiling just out of reach of the monkey. And then he keeps one stool there in one corner of the room, and if monkey tries to reach the bananas, it can't reach. So maybe it will occur to it that it can use the stool and then reach the bananas, so that at least it will have learnt to use the stool and then get that banana. And then to keep watch on the monkey, he makes a small hole in the door through which the scientist could peep in to see what the monkey is doing. And then scientist is very happy with his arrangement and is eagerly waiting for the monkey to learn this. So after some time, when he looks through the hole, what he sees is a red curious eye, because the monkey is looking through the hole to see what the scientist is doing. So what scientists expected the monkey to learn, the monkey learned something else, but it did learn in that way. So we find that learning seems to be a very, very basic instinct of all living beings. It seems that the living beings, they have to learn to survive, because unless they learn to survive, nothing else in life is possible. So the first concern of any living being is to survive, and those living beings who learn quickly to survive, then they proliferate, they increase in number, and they are able to live. And after survival, then other things they can learn. So learning seems to be a very, very basic thing. In fact, one can say that yes, that is the essential quality or essential aspect of life. So if you say life or living, it means that you cannot separate it from learning, and therefore you find a statement like life is a movement in learning. So that is a statement made by Krishnamurti. So how does a living being learns? Now a living being is constantly interacting with the environment, and that interaction is the life of that living being. Now if there is no interaction, then there is no life also. Like say, if you stop interacting with the environment, then you are as good as dead. A person in coma will not interact with the environment. He is simply lying there, although his body is alive, but we do not say that the person in coma is a living person, because he is not interacting with the environment. So interacting with the environment is the life of that interacting entity. And through that interaction, then that living being is learning. The input from the environment goes into the living entity, living person, through the sensory organs. That input creates a sensation in that living being, and from that sensation the living being responds, and that response then creates an event, and through the experience of that event that being learns, and whatever it learns is stored in the brain as the memory, and then that memory is used to go through the further events that are happening in life. So, that is how you can say the knowledge or the information builds up in a living person, and in human beings also it is building up in that way. And you can see that this is the process which goes on in all living forms, and whatever is built up within, that becomes the basis of response or basis of reaction of that living being. And you can say that maybe the intelligence of nature operates initially in this way, because every living entity has its own database of whatever it has collected or gathered, and out of that it reacts or responds. So, even if you take a simple entity as virus, now virus, if it is stored in a bottle, then it is just like a chemical. You do not see any living activity in it. But the moment it is in the living body, immediately it is active and starts multiplying itself. Now, an ordinary chemical will not multiply itself, whether it is in the bottle or whether it is in the living body. But the virus kept in the bottle just like a chemical, but when it is in the living body, it starts multiplying. So, it becomes active. So, where does it get that intelligence? How does it know that it is not in a bottle, but it is in a living body? So, it seems that the nature, the intelligence is active throughout nature, and in fact, even in the inanimate things, like say the planets going around the sun, right, and all the laws of nature and the behavior of all these physical bodies in the nature as per those laws, because the earth cannot suddenly go out of its way, or sun cannot stop rising. All these are very regular things. So, it seems that the intelligence seems to be the basis of existence, without which probably the existence is not possible. But coming back to the intelligence displayed or shown by living beings. Now, let us again look back this process, a living being interacting with the environment, and from that interaction gathering knowledge and storing and acting from that knowledge. Right. Now, except human beings, all the other living forms, they get the knowledge through direct interaction with the environment, and through that interaction only they get the knowledge. So, more interaction, more knowledge, then more varied could be the response, and therefore, more chances of survival. Because if a living entity knows only one thing, and if that one thing is not the right thing for survival, then naturally it can't survive. But in case of human beings who have the thinking capacity, human beings who can think, now through thinking they can generate lot of knowledge. And then the knowledge is not just a result of direct interaction with the environment, but knowledge is also through the thinking activity. Like say the scientist does some experiment. Now that experiment is the interaction with the environment. Through that experiment he draws some conclusions. On the basis of those conclusions he further thinks logically and says that if these are the conclusions, then as per these conclusions, then in such and such situation he should see such and such results or such and such things, and therefore he predicts beforehand what will be the result of his experiment if it is carried in this way. And so in that sense he is creating knowledge, he is creating information through his thinking activity. And that is what the technological movement, all the technological movement and development in science, it is through this process. They experiment, observe the happening in the experiment and draw their conclusions. On the basis of conclusions, try to understand what exactly is happening, and then based on that understanding they are also able to predict that in this kind of situation if you do this, then this is what you will see as the result, or this will be the consequence. And this is how the technology is developing. And in other way also they say that okay, this is the result we want, this is the situation that is at our hand, so what should we do, what kind of gadget, what kind of appliance we should create so that we get this result. And then all the inventions and those things, they happen in that way. So technologically the knowledge and information is very important, and the whole technological movement is based on that. And therefore the intelligence in this field is taken as the capacity to acquire knowledge, the capacity to apply that knowledge to get all these various inventions, and then use those inventions to change the way we live our life and do many other things. So that is the intelligence of thought, because it is through the thinking activity that intelligence seems to operate. Now what is happening technologically is there is now what is called as artificial intelligence. We call it as AI or artificial intelligence. So whatever is the function of the human brain, which is to think, to understand, to learn, and to apply and to accumulate and gather more and more knowledge. Now all that function can be done by the machines, by the computers, and they can also act on that basis. Now so far what was the situation, that computers were programmed and they could only act according to their program. If something is not programmed, then computers will not be able to respond to that. Like say there is an interesting joke, because there is one robot which is given a task of protecting a human being, a lady. So that lady, she had a robot as a bodyguard, and that robot will be all the time with her and will always prevent her from doing anything which will put her in a dangerous situation. And so the company of the robot was very restrictive, and so that lady didn't like it. Sometimes she used to curse, she used to abuse that robot, and the robot's response would be, sorry madam, I am not programmed to take that command. So that was the situation before, which means the robots will behave only according to the program that is uh, fed into them. And if they are not programmed in a certain way, then they won't be able to behave in that way. Right? So, but now the computers can learn. They can learn like human beings can learn. Say in a human being's case, if he doesn't know something, then he can learn. And after learning, he can get that thing done. So now the machines can also do that. They can learn, and after learning, they can apply that, whatever they have learned, and then get the things done. And so that is the artificial intelligence. And that is going to create many more challenges for human beings, because you won't know what the machine has learned, and machine will respond according to whatever it has learned. And if you don't know what it has learned, that means you won't be able to know what the machine will respond. So it will become unpredictable, and then you are in a difficulty. And also there are many other aspects to artificial intelligence and the kinds of difficulties it can create. Now, with the development of technology, human beings, the way they live their life is changing drastically. Lots of things are happening, and they are becoming more and more dependent on gadgets. And most importantly, most of the function of the human brain is being taken over by the machines. Because in the childhood we could learn those multiplication tables and do some of the sums just using our brain. But now, even to add 5 plus 5, people use the calculator, or they just don't know uh, how this thing works. And for everything, they need the help of the machine. That means maybe the brain has lost or losing the capacity of doing these simple mathematical calculations and so on. But the real challenge are twofold in this case. The one challenge is that when human brain will not have much work to be done, it will occupy itself with all kinds of entertainment. And the technology will provide innumerable ways of entertaining. And that we are seeing, I mean, how people are stuck with all kinds of games, video games, or this even social media also, forwarding messages from here to there. And this is just the beginning. But the kinds of things is that they will be able to create their own virtual reality. And in that virtual reality, they may be living their life completely devoid of interaction with the actual external world and so on. I'm already seeing some young persons completely lost into this kind of thing and not taking much interest in the actual physical activities. So the brain occupied with the entertainment, and then naturally deterioration, because if the brain is not used, then it is going to deteriorate. And so because that is the law, either you use it or you lose it. So that is one challenge. And the other challenge is that the human beings are using technology for creating destructive weapons. And there is a distinct possibility that the human beings will use weapons produced by them to destroy themselves. Now we say that a living being who is able to survive better, we say that yes, the intelligence is functioning in that living being. But here the human beings, whatever intelligence they have developed, that same intelligence, using that same intelligence, if they are going to destroy themselves, then are they intelligent? That question arises. And the other aspect is that, psychologically speaking, the human beings have not advanced at all. Psychologically, they are as primitive as they were uh, since ancient times. And their psychological makeup is same. They get angry, they have fear, they feel insecure, they are still ambitious, they have various desires, and so psychologically there isn't much change in them, although technologically they have progressed. And all the technological knowledge, if they apply to psychological field, that does not seem to work. So the intelligence of thought doesn't seem to work in the psychological realm. For example, a person may learn everything about, say, a reaction of anger. He studies anger, he finds out what makes him angry, what is provocation, and when you are angry, what you do, and then how to manage that reaction of anger, and various ways and means he may devise to manage that anger. But is he really free from anger? We can't say that. Because in spite of all these things, whenever there is a provocation, he will get angry. And when he gets angry, he only knows how to manage it. And it may not be possible to manage the anger all the time. Sometimes he may fail also. So, which means that all the intelligence which he has acquired in the field of technology, which we call as the intelligence of thought, that doesn't seem to work in the psychological realm. If a human being wants to understand himself, and if he tries to understand himself in terms of the information and knowledge, then he will end up with lots of knowledge about himself. But that knowledge will not be able to change him, will not be able to transform him, will not be able to bring freedom to him from all his psychological content. And therefore, the intelligence of thought, although it has a limited role in a human life, there are areas of human life where it doesn't seem to be applicable, where it doesn't seem to work. And therefore, a question arises, is there any other kind of intelligence apart from the intelligence of thought? And if there is any other kind of intelligence, then how will it work? Whether it is possible to come upon that intelligence. And if there is a human being who has that intelligence, can he awaken it in other human beings? So these are really the basic questions uh, that we'll be looking at or exploring uh, in this meeting. That is there an intelligence which is not just the intelligence of thought, but an intelligence which is completely different, which will work even in the psychological realm. And then whether that kind of intelligence can be awakened in a human being, or if a person is interested, how he should go about it. So for that, we have to find out what is learning. Because you see, the intelligence cannot be awakened just by following. Intelligence cannot be awakened just by imitating. Intelligence can be awakened only when you try to use your brain in order to understand something. Only in that case, the awakening of intelligence is possible. Because it is said that if a disciple just follows the instructions of his guru, then he will become a very obedient follower of his guru, but he will not become an intelligent human being. Because the intelligence will come only when a person will try to understand what is being said to him, understand its significance, and he is using his brain in order to learn. Now, when we talk about learning, we have said that every living entity has to learn to survive. And this learning is in terms of gathering knowledge and information. Now, we have seen that as far as the psychological field is concerned, psychological aspect of human life is concerned, there the gathering of knowledge and information doesn't seem to help. It doesn't bring freedom from accumulation, freedom from those psychological reactions. And therefore, again a question arises, is there a different kind of learning? A learning which does not depend on gathering of knowledge and information, but yet it is learning. And learning is possible through observation. Because when you want to learn about something on your own, then you have to observe, then you have to interact with that thing, you have to observe that thing. And through the observation and through the interaction, you learn. But in that interaction or in that observation, again, learning is taking place in terms of accumulation of knowledge. So you gather knowledge of that thing, and based on that knowledge, you are able to handle that thing the way you would like to handle, you will be able to use it, and so on. And once you are completely familiar with that thing, then you say that, yes, I have learnt about this thing. You want to play some game, then you have to acquire a lot of knowledge through those experiments or through playing, and then apply that knowledge in order to get your desired results. So that is one kind of learning. But when you apply that kind of learning to understand yourself, what you are psychologically, then the effect of that kind of learning is that you end up in accumulating a lot of knowledge about yourself, in the sense that you will say that, okay, I get angry in such situations, these are the things I don't like, they make me react in this way, or I'm afraid of those things, or I want to achieve this or achieve that, or I feel insecure in such and such situation. And so lots of knowledge is gathered like that, and that knowledge is used to manage your psychological nature. That means when you feel insecure, then this is what you should do. A person feeling financially insecure, he ends up in accumulating lots of money, and yet at the end of it, he is still insecure because now he is afraid of losing that money, all that which he has gathered. So a person seeking security through knowledge is still insecure at the end of it. And therefore, that kind of learning is not of much use. Because we have said that in order to survive, we have to learn. And here, in case of human beings, if they want to survive, then they have to learn about their psychological nature. their psychological aspect. They don't learn about it, then they won't be able to survive. Because now here we have a highly sophisticated technology in the hands of highly primitive psychological human beings. Psychologically, they are very primitive, and technologically, they are highly advanced. And this is the imbalance. So, they won't be able to handle technology. They are going to harm themselves, they are going to destroy themselves. And therefore, this is really a challenge. So, they have to learn about their psychological nature, what they are psychologically, and out of that learning, then the freedom from their psychological makeup. And only then they will be able to survive. And for that learning, you have to learn or find out what is learning without accumulation. Without gathering knowledge, how does one learn? And if learning is through observation, then can you observe a thing without accumulating or gathering knowledge about it? In order to observe anything, you have to be in contact with it. Without contact, you cannot observe. Even when you look at a tree, you are in contact with the tree, and the connecting factor is the ray of light. The light reflected from the tree entering your eyes and making an image on the retina of your eye. And that image is what you see or you sense. So you are in contact with that object or with that tree. So contact is essential in order to observe. Now, if you want to observe your psychological reaction, then you have to be in contact with that psychological reaction. There has to be contact between you and that psychological reaction. Now, here the problem is that are you different from your psychological reaction or you are the psychological reaction? Because when you look at the tree is different, you are different. There are two distinct entities. And you can certainly say that you are not the tree. But when you look at your psychological reaction, are you different from your psychological reaction or you are the psychological reaction? When I am angry, am I different from the anger or I am anger itself? If I am different from the anger, then I will try to manage the anger. But if I am anger, what can I do about it? Nothing, just the observation. So in different words, what we can say is that when you want to observe a psychological reaction, in order to observe, there has to be contact between you and the psychological reaction. And then the contact is so close that there is no separate you from the reaction. You are the reaction. So when there is such a close contact, then through that close contact, the reaction of anger unfolds. It reveals itself completely. Krishnaji calls it as the flowering of a reaction. When a reaction is not interfered with, then that reaction is free to be what it is. And when it is free to be what it is, it unfolds, it flowers. And whatever that flowers also withers, because flowering and withering, these are inseparable processes. Whatever flowers withers. And so the reaction as it flowers, it also withers. And when it withers, then there is nothing to learn. And there is freedom from that reaction. When a reaction has flowered and withered and come to its end, there is no more any reaction, there is no longer that reaction, and therefore there is nothing to learn. And therefore there is freedom. And in that freedom, then, a different kind of understanding happens. And that different kind of understanding is the beginning of that different kind of intelligence. So you see, what is the sequence? We have learned to observe and gather knowledge and information out of that observation and use that knowledge. So that is one kind of learning. And we are quite familiar with that and we are using it, and there is this technological movement based on that. And from there we say that that kind of learning is not applicable in the psychological field, and therefore we raised a question whether there is a different kind of learning possible, a learning which is non-accumulative, and how that learning operates in that psychological field, and how that psychological reaction comes to an end naturally, and how that ending of a psychological reaction naturally brings freedom. And in that freedom, then a completely different kind of understanding happens, a completely different kind of intelligence that operates, which is not the intelligence which is based on thought, or which is the intelligence of thought, but an intelligence which is which has nothing to do with thought, in fact, which operates in a completely different way. Now, what would be the nature of that intelligence? The intelligence of thought works analytically. Analysis is its approach. The thought has to function logically and rationally, and it will analyze things, and based on that analysis, it will understand that thing. I mean, to give an example, you want to understand is structure and function of a certain machine. Then what to do? You analyze that machine, means separate it in its parts, understand the function of each part, then putting all those parts together, then you understand how the machine functions. So that is the analytical approach. But analytical approach is not applicable to understand ourselves psychologically. Analytical approach is possible only with inanimate things. But for animate things, you cannot analyze them, because you can't separate them into their parts, because once you do that, then they are no longer living beings. If you try to separate cell into its different parts, the cell is no longer living, it is already dead. And then you can only dissect a dead cell and then try to understand what is a dead cell. But if you want to understand a living entity, then analysis is not the way, then the observation is the only way. And when you want to observe yourself or your reactions and all those things, which are also living, then the observation is the only way, a non-accumulative observation. And when you observe like that, then the kind of understanding that happens brings freedom. So now this understanding is referred to as insight by Krishnaji. he says that if you are able to observe like this, then you have an insight about that thing. And when you have an insight, insight means a completely different level of understanding. The understanding which comes through insight, if you want to express it in terms of the understanding of thought, then you may need volumes to express it or to explain it. So, one flash of understanding, which is insight, to explain it in words, in terms of knowledge, in terms of the known, may take volumes to explain it. So, that is the potential of this insight, and that awakening of, or that happening of that insight is actually the awakening of intelligence. Now, how does this insight happen, or how can it happen? There are some interesting examples of that also. You see, we have the thinking capacity, but do we apply it completely? That means, do we use the intelligence of our thought? Let us call that intelligence of thought as intellect, just to differentiate it from this other intelligence. We'll call it as intellect and the intellectual capacity. Now, do we apply our intellectual capacity fully, or we are just half-hearted about it? Now, when you apply your intellectual capacity fully, you are stretching your thought to its limit. And when the thought is stretched to its limit, it just stops. It's not, you are not able to think. It's not that the thought is incapacitated, but thought is stretched to its limit, and it understands that no further thinking is possible, because this is the limit. And out of that understanding, it is quiet, not functioning. And at such a point, when the thought is completely quiet, but there is still the full energy, there is this urge to understand. You have to understand something, and the thought has reached its limit, no longer useful, so it is quiet. And at such a moment, then there is a flash of insight. And when that flash of insight happens, then everything is very clear. There is no longer a problem. And a new kind of, you can say, understanding, or a new kind of things, it comes out of that. In fact, they say that the creativity is possible only through such insights. Thought can never be creative. Thought can be only repetitive. But the real creativity comes about only through such kind of insight. And there are examples. I mean, these examples I have used many times, like, say, a scientist studying the structure of benzene, and he thought in all possible ways, he explored and couldn't figure out what would be the structure of the benzene. And then he dreamed that a snake is trying to swallow its own tail. And in that, suddenly it flashed to him that why the structure of the benzene should be an open chain. It could be a closed chain. So it could be a ring. And then he immediately uh, drew the structure of the benzene, and he found that yes, that is the structure. And so he got that insight or that understanding. Then even in case of some of the artists or musicians, you will find that they are really creative when their thought is silent, and only then they are able to express their art in a creative way. In fact, they say that Krishnamurti has given this example uh, about a Chinese artist. He wants to draw a portrait of a tree, so he will keep observing the tree. He will keep it observing till he becomes that tree, which means that there is no separation between him and the tree psychologically. And when that happens, then that is the point where he understands what a tree is as a living entity. And then when he draws the portrait of that tree, then it is not just a picture of that tree, but it is a live portrait. That means you can sense the life of a tree uh, looking at that portrait. So these are some of the examples. So what we are saying is that there is a different kind of intelligence which functions through insights, and that insight, Krishnaji also calls it as perception. And whenever there is an insight or perception, the action is immediate. That aspect is also there. Because with the intellect, the action may not follow the intellectual understanding. And that is very obvious because we do have lots of knowledge, but we don't behave always according to that knowledge. The most common example given is that we know that cigarette smoking is injurious to health, but we still continue to smoke. That means the action doesn't follow the knowledge. But in case of perception, there is no gap between the action and the understanding. And if there is a perception, there is a corresponding action. So then you don't have to ask, how do I apply this perception to my daily life? Because the perception and action, there is no separation, there is no gap, and it functions in that way. And also related to that, when there is that freedom, when there is psychological freedom, in that psychological freedom, when you observe, then since there is no separation between the observer and the observed, there is a sense of unity, there is a sense of relationship, there is a sense that you are not different from that, or you are that. And that sense is the beginning of love. And they say that it is said that the true intelligence is possible only in the state of love. And whatever notions of love we have, all those notions are not love at all. It is something else. Usually, love is mistaken as attachment, love is mistaken as many other things, and word love is used in many different ways. But all those things are not love. It is a completely different quality which probably doesn't exist in our life. And they say love is blind, but it is not the love which is blind, it is the attachment which is blind, while love has its own intelligence. And so now we have an intelligence which is of completely different nature, different quality, which is love. In fact, Krishna says that you cannot separate love and intelligence. They are always together. So a loving person is also intelligent person, or a really intelligent person is also a loving person. So if intelligence is love, then it should be possible that through love the intelligence can be awakened, which means that if you really love your children, then it is possible to awaken that intelligence through that love. But if you are merely attached to them and you have lots of expectations from them, or you are simply planning their life according to your desires, according to your wishes, then probably you are not loving them. And then that intelligence cannot be awakened. So these are the various ways, I mean, various approaches. One is the urge to understand, the intensity of that urge to understand, making you, bringing the thought to an end. That means stopping the thought. That means you don't stop the thought, but the thought itself stops out of its own understanding. And then the insight happening and the intelligence. And the other is this love, the quality of love. Through that, the intelligence can be awakened. And in that intelligence, there is no sense of separation, but the life, the unity of life is realized. And since unity of life is realized, there is no longer any conflict, there is no longer any comparison or any such thing. Then there is total harmony. And probably without that kind of intelligence, uh, the universe cannot exist. In fact, the whole existence is based on this love and compassion, without which the existence is simply not possible. So I think that is the highest intelligence. And probably each human being has the potential to awaken that intelligence in him. So I think I will stop at this point and invite questions from you, uh, so that we are able to move deeper into this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All these things you have spelled out very logically, sir. I mean, it is understandable. But I think it is still, there is a leap of imagination is required. So I think it would be very good if you can make some illustration, an example to make things more clear. I mean, the concepts are understood, but the concepts to get translated into the practice, I think it requires again, a lot of work. I think you can relieve us from that difficult work if it is possible. Yes.
Yeah, in short, probably you want examples to illustrate this. Yeah. Now, one example we have given about that scientist, how he understood the structure of the benzene ring. That means you are focusing all your thought energy onto something, and nothing further is possible in that, because thought is unable to penetrate, and therefore it stops or is silent. And then in that silence, a new understanding dawns. Suddenly something occurs, and then you suddenly understand thing in a different way. Now, probably we also may have some similar situations in our lives, that we are struggling with something, and we have done a lot of struggle, and in spite of the struggle we don't seem to come out of that situation. And then when you are just helpless or just sitting not doing anything, and suddenly something occurs to you, and then you go as per that, and you see that the situation is resolved, or suddenly something comes up which you take help of, and the situation is resolved. And these kinds of things, they seem to happen almost in everybody's life. That means in various kinds of situations, because of our struggle, or because of maybe the limited nature of thought, we are not sensitive enough to sense things which may be already there. And when the thought is quiet, then probably we are able to sense those things, and then uh, those things, then they can resolve the situations. Particularly, say, when you need a help, and although the help is available, you are not able to see it, because you are still struggling to resolve that issue. But when you stop that struggle, then maybe that makes you see that, oh, this help is there, so why didn't it occur to me earlier? And then one takes help of that, and then a situation is resolved. But the other aspect, the affection, the compassion, right? Now there, say, you may be trying everything to establish a relationship with another person, and based on your interaction with that person, and based on the knowledge and other things which you have about that person, and still you are not able to establish the right kind of relationship with that person, in spite of all the logic, in spite of all the knowledge and all those things. But when you do have some sense of compassion, and that comes when you do not want anything from that person, there is absolutely no demand of any kind from that person, and yet you are concerned about that person. Now, that kind of situation can give rise to a compassionate feeling. And in that compassionate feeling, then you are able to understand the person better. Now, many times in our life, this happens only when you lose that person, unfortunately. which means that either you have lost the person through death, or you have lost the person through separation, and so on. And then when you are all left to yourself, and then when you look back upon your life, then you start seeing things, oh, why did I behave this way in that situation? Or I, couldn't I understand this aspect of that person? And then probably you learn that yes, you have been unnecessarily harsh towards that person. And even if you were not harsh, you have done everything, but still you have a sense that, oh, you could have done even much better or much more than what you have already done. And so that uh, sense of compassion makes you understand the other person better. Although in many cases it happens after you have lost that person. And actually, it should happen much before that. And it can happen before that only when this interference of thought stops, which means that you should be able to look at that person or observe that person or be with that person without the interference of thought, which means that no expectations, no demands, nothing. Just in contact with that person, being with that person, and then you will be able to sense the life of that person, what it is, and so on. And that needs quite a lot of sensitivity, and that also needs quite a lot of energy and sensitivity. And if one is living one's life sensitively and with energy, then understanding other person is much simpler and easier. But without that, then if it is based mostly on the knowledge and thought, then probably then there isn't the real understanding, uh, and things will be far more complicated than otherwise they would be. And this kind of appeal, you see, one doesn't actually always go by one's intellectual understanding. I have tried it with some of the students. So if a student is doing certain things and you want to make him understand, or he's not doing certain things and you want him to do those things because the school demands that they should be doing those things. So you logically talk to them, right? Put everything before them, appeal to their intellect, explain, and ask them whether they have understood it or not understood. And at the end of it, they say that, yes, sir, what you are saying is perfectly correct, perfectly right. And we should be doing this. But our heart doesn't accept that. दिल नहीं मानता है. दिमाग तो मान रहा है कि ये क्या है, लेकिन दिल नहीं मान रहा है. इसलिए वो वैसा नहीं हो रहा है हमसे. That means the intellect is understanding, is accepting what you are saying. You are completely nicely explaining it, putting it logically. But the heart is not accepting. It is not touching the heart. And if it is not touching the heart, then you are not likely to do that thing. Then it is going to remain mostly at the intellectual level. Now, if you ask why is it not touching the heart? Now, Krishnaji has given the criterion. He says that when two persons who are interacting with each other, when they are at the same level, at the same time, with the same intensity, then their communication will touch their hearts. Then there will be that sense of compassion. But if it is not there, then probably the communication won't touch the heart. Then it will be mostly at the intellectual level. So I don't know whether this answers your question. Yeah, please go ahead, madam. Yeah, please give her the mic.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah,
The first one is just to a springboard on what you just said
yeah.
is relationship with the person,
Yes.
whether it's a co-worker
Right,
or
right,
whatever.
right.
Uh, how do anyone manage the interaction with the person and that should not get affected by the past experience or future expectation,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
The current interaction with the person
yes,
should not, if it is depending on the past experience, then the thought process happens,
yeah,
or if it's a future expectation.
yeah.
At that point, how can the observer and the observed, the one and the single person, right?
Yeah.
Me and the psychological thought that is emerging. How do we even train the mind to do? I mean, I don't know if train is the right word to use, but how does that process even happen?
Yeah, probably your question is how does this function in a relationship? You see, our relationship is mostly based on past knowledge, as you have pointed out. The knowledge which we have gathered through interaction with that person. And that knowledge dictates our actions with respect to that person. And knowledge doesn't mean simply the knowledge in terms of the information, but there is a lot of psychological content in that, because that person has said something to me in the past, and when he said that, then I was psychologically reacting, or maybe I was hurt by what he said. And so that sense of hurt, which is the psychological content, that is associated with whatever he has said. And so the memory is not just a plain information, but it's an information with lots of psychological content in it. And when one interacts with that person, that psychological content comes up. And then the interaction is based on that psychological content. So if I am hurt by a person in the past, then in the present, when I meet that person, then the memory of that past hurt comes up. And that memory is not just an information, but when that memory comes up, I start actually feeling that hurt, which means that by recollecting hurt, I am in the state of hurt in the present, although the event had happened long ago. So in the present, I am in the state of hurt, and out of that state of hurt, then I am interacting with that person. So naturally, my interaction will be influenced by that. So either I will not talk properly to that person, or I will say something which can hurt that person in turn, or if I see that person coming towards me, then I may change my path and go the other way. And so all these reactions which are based on that feeling of hurt, they will take place. So naturally then the communication will not be possible, or if it is possible, it will be based on that hurt. So now in the interaction, is it possible not to let this past interfere in the interaction in the present? Right? So because without that you cannot have the you can say a useful interaction in the present. I mean, say in the workplace, for example. Now, if there are lots of hurts or lots of displeasures, then when you are interacting with the other co-worker, and if that interaction is based on whatever has happened in the past, then naturally you can't work with that co-worker in the present, because those things will come and obstruct it. So we have to put it aside and then interact on the basis of what exactly is the present situation. So which means that we have to learn to put things aside. Say even a teacher, say when suppose he is scolded by the principal and he is already in a disturbed state, and now he has to go and take a class. Now in that disturbed state of mind, he can't take the class, he can't teach. So either he has to give up his class on that day, or if he has learned, then he can put aside his psychological state for the time being and carry out his teaching work, and then revert back to his psychological state and observe and do whatever he can do about it. So that kind of thing one needs to learn. And even with the interaction with our own children also, we have to learn to listen to them completely, because even before they have completed what they want to say, we already start reacting, and then children, they are not able to express themselves completely. Then they just stop talking further, and then they stop also communicating with you. So, and this is possible only if you have that sense of compassion or affection with them, because without compassion it's not possible to listen to the other person. The thought will interfere, and everything that comes with the interference of thought, that will affect that communication. So I'm not sure whether I have answered your question, or if you have more to ask. Yeah, yeah.
I can speak loud.
Yeah,
The thing is, when your psychological thought is being observed by oneself,
Yeah.
like my psychological
Yeah.
thought is being observed by
Yes.
the observer.
yes,
One thing is, I realize that process is extremely intense.
yes,
So when I'm interacting with a person, I cannot do that process then and there, because
Yeah.
it, at least, I mean, maybe it differs from person to person, but yeah.
yeah,
Second thing is, I kind of observe that suddenly I realize that I have become part of the thought rather than being an observer. So how do I get back to that state of mind where I need to be the observer and not become part of that psychological thought? it's quite, I found it extremely challenging. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Yeah, is it that what you are saying is, say other person is already in a state of psychological reaction, no?
just one person there
Okay.
observing that person's psychological thought.
That means I am observing my own psychological thoughts.
Because when I'm
That's right.
interacting with the person, other
Right,
person,
right.
completely second person,
Yeah.
there is a psychological thought I am having,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So I am observing my own psychological thought.
that's right.
So therefore, the thought with blossoms and withers, and I deal with compassion.
Yes.
That's the end goal.
Yeah.
But that whole process of observing my own psychological thought and not being swept away in the psychological thought, but being an
Yes.
observer is,
Yes.
I found it extremely intense
Yes.
and not
Yeah,
definitely
that's
not an
right.
easy
Yeah, yeah.
way. So I don't know.
Yeah, so what you are asking is that I am in the state of reaction, psychological reaction, and when I am in the state of psychological reaction, from that state I am interacting with another person, then that interaction will be definitely influenced by my psychological state of reaction. Now we have said that you have to observe that psychological reaction, and observing means to be in contact with that psychological reaction. And in this interaction, you say that the psychological reaction is so intense that before you have observed it, been with it, and reaction has ended, even before any of that happens, you are already interacting, because there is an urgency of interaction, and so you already interact, and when you already interact, then naturally the consequences, they will happen, and so on. Now in a way you are saying that there isn't enough time with you to observe the psychological reaction, to resolve it, and then interact with the other person. Because when you have dissolved that psychological reaction, only then there can be compassion, and then out of that compassion you can interact with the other person, right? But if the reaction itself is not resolved, and in order to resolve the reaction, you need to observe it, and to observe. So this is the question: to observe, do you need time? To observe a psychological reaction, does one need time? Or it just is a glance, just noticing that, or just being aware that yes, the psychological reaction has arisen. Now this is where you see a psychological reaction will not instantly, in the sense, gets intensified, but there is the beginning, there is the arising of the psychological reaction. Now most of the time we are not aware of the arising of this psychological reaction. Only when it intensifies and then is already influencing our actions, that time probably we become aware of it, that oh, this is, and then it is probably too late. But at whatever point we become aware, from that point onwards is a possibility of preventing the consequences of that reaction. But if person is aware right in the beginning, as the reaction has just started arising, then at that moment, then you don't need time. The moment you say that you are getting angry, right, that point of awareness that you are getting angry will immediately hold that anger at that level only. It will not let it proliferate further. And when the anger is held at that point, which is just the beginning, then it is possible not to let it influence your interaction with the other person. So, it is a matter of whether a person is sensitive enough to sense the arising of a psychological reaction in him before it has uh, arisen with full blast or before it has intensified it. So, which means that then whether one is sensitively looking at oneself, uh, most of the time whether one is attentive to what is happening oneself, because this kind of capacity cannot come overnight. I mean, if a person is used to live a life of inattention, then it is very unlikely that he will become attentive at the time of crisis, because the same tendency of being inattentive will extend itself even during the crisis, and the person then will feel lost. But if he has lived attentively, then in the crisis that same attention will function and he will be able to be aware of what's happening. So, which means that if I am observing all my psychological reactions as and when they arise and be with them and observe them not separately, but observe them as the observer is the observed, then there is freedom from those reactions. They won't take roots or they won't intensify further. And then in my interaction with other beings, in that interaction also, whenever these reactions arise, I will be able to observe them. Because whatever way I live my life, that way becomes my tendency, and I am more likely to continue it rather than suddenly again change and be different. It doesn't work probably that way. So, in fact, Krishnaji has said that if you live your life intelligently, then that intelligence will operate even in the situation of crisis. But if a person has not lived his life intelligently, then even in the crisis, the intelligence will not operate because it's not there.
Namaste, sir.
Yeah.
Question is why intelligence cannot be given to another person who has that intelligence which Krishnaji is speaking. Another thing is that we have only intellect of the thought only.
Yeah.
If without pointing out of this intelligence, can thought awaken this intelligence? Two things, sir. Here, pointing out is necessary, and can it be given by a person who has this intelligence to another?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. I have understood your question. The first question is, can intelligence be given to another person? So, probably it cannot be given. You can only give knowledge and information. It's like a teacher transferring all the knowledge of the subject from his brain to the student's brain. It's just like copying a data from one hard disk to another hard disk. So, that's what it amounts to. And so, the knowledge can be given, the information can be given, but intelligence, can it be given? Is there something to be given in intelligence? So, probably intelligence cannot be given. So, if a disciple thinks that the guru will make him intelligent, then probably he is having a wrong notion. Probably he is having a blind faith or blind belief, because the guru cannot transmit the intelligence. Nobody can transmit intelligence to another person. The intelligence comes through the endeavor of that person alone. And what the other person can do is that he can at least point out so that this person endeavors in order to understand what is pointed out. And when he does that, then there is a possibility of awakening of intelligence. So, which means that a intelligent person may speak some truths of life, and whatever he has spoken, the disciple, he takes them up, tries to understand them, applying his own, you can say, intellect or his own capacity or his own resources, and through that endeavor, then the intelligence can awaken. So that is what is possible, but not the transmitting of intelligence from one person to another person. That is not possible. Even no guru can do it. Now, the other question is that as an individual living his life based on thought and intellect, is there any action, is there anything which such a person can do which can help awaken that intelligence? So, that is what we were saying, that the person who is living a life based on intellect, now is he making full use of his intellectual capacity, or whether he is living far below his intellectual capacity? Now, if he is living far below his intellectual capacity, then probably there is no possibility of awakening of that intelligence. But when he is living his life with his full intellectual capacity, means he is applying all his resources, all his capacities, all his potential, right? In which case, there will be a point where no further thinking is possible. He has exhausted all his resources, he has exhausted all his thinking power or capacity and all these things, and as a result of which the thought becomes silent. You see, what the usual people do, or traditionally what they do, they have several systems, methods to make the thought quiet. But a thought made quiet is not really a quiet thought. It is a thought which is incapacitated. That means through those systems and methods, a person is, the brain is made numb. Brain is incapable of thinking, and therefore the thought is quiet. Now, such state of mind is not conducive to awakening of that intelligence. The thought should not be incapacitated. Thought should have its full potential. Thought should be fully capable, and yet it is not operating because it understands that the operation is futile. Nothing is going to come out of it. So out of that understanding, it is quiet. But it has not lost its potential or capacity. It is fully there intact. Now, only in such a state, there is a possibility of different kind of understanding. So, what does it mean as far as our daily life is concerned is whether I am doing things with my full capacity, full intellectual capacity, which means that am I doing things in a thoughtful way, or am I just being casual about them? Because usually we find that our thoughts are quite casual, and we are doing something and thinking something else, and feeling is also something else, and so there is a total disharmony between these three factors: the action, the feeling, and the thought. And in that disharmony, then nothing can happen properly. But if there is a complete harmony, then yes, then intelligent action is possible. I think I have answered the question.
Sir, namaskar.
Yeah, namaskar. Yeah.
On it. Sir, you said about artificial intelligence
Yes.
and computers, primitive, very advanced, the human
Yeah.
beings have got it outside.
Yeah.
The primitive people thinking,
Yeah.
the leaders are holding
Yeah.
it. Is it, are we in a place where the doomsday is going to come, sir? Because everywhere there is a collapse of systems are going on. Ideological differences, environmental collapse, different wars are taking place. Krishnamurti, in effect, is not there at all. So those primitive thoughts, which is governing the world, different people at the different ideological. It's very short because there are, you know that there are different people
Yeah.
at the different point of eras have told. It's very fast going. The track is very speed, marketing, everything. So are we in a dooms? Because a lot of things, what the speed is going and the nature is in the another way. What
Yeah.
Krishnaji always says,
Yeah.
don't get cut off with the nature. So we understand that. But what about those people, primitive thinking heads sitting in the seats? Where we are leading, is humanity where we are leading.
Yeah, I mean, what you are saying is that the people who govern us, they are still of primitive mentality and they are leading the world. And then such primitive persons leading the world, naturally, it is leading toward destruction and damage. Yes, but artificial intelligence is probably revolutionize all these things. In fact, Krishnaji has talked about the artificial intelligence taking over the governance, and which means that governments are no longer required. Whatever function the government is doing, that is done by artificial intelligence. And in which case, then things will be done exactly according to the physical requirement and not according to the personal choices and likes and dislikes of the politicians. So you see, one of the things this artificial intelligence is going to do is to make the whole system quite impersonal. And so in which case the corruptions and the other kinds of factors, they will become very, very difficult, almost impossible. And when the things are streamlined like that and the rule of the law is established, then probably that will bring about certain sense of order at the physical level at least. And of course, people will learn that at least for the business purposes. You see, right now, what is the main driving force, driving energy? That is the economical. Everybody is doing things for the economical profit. And they will find that unless they behave, they cannot make profit. And so they will have to overcome these feelings of nationality. They will have to overcome lots of other things in order to do business and uh, get profit. So in that case, all the other fixed ideas and notions, maybe they will have to give up. So if they find that by opening the manufacturing units in India, they are going to profit more. So they will move their industry here and then earn their profit. if they find that if an Indian becomes the president, then that will benefit them in their business and in their making money. Then they will see to it that that is what will happen. So at least for the financial profit, they will do things which were unthinkable of. Now you see that to earn profit, they have to have war, some war going on in some part of the world, and then they can sell their weapons and all those things. But there may be situation where they will find that instead of war, through other things they are able to earn much more money than through war. Then they will stop selling weapons, and therefore the wars will not happen, and then they will be able to do business and earn more money. So at least in that way, what I see is that the doomsday is not going to come. That's merely a fear uh, which has no basis, or which has only the fear or only the sense of insecurity as the basis. But at least for the sake of profit, monetary profit, some sense will prevail in people, and at least for the sake of profit, they will start behaving and changing them. And that is possible because the humanity has lived like that. I mean, for the sake of profit, they are willing to do anything. And so most of the governance and administration taken over by the machines, so that the corruption and other misuse is not possible. And then this sense prevailing in the people that only in the peace they can make more profit and not in the state of war. Then the wars will stop automatically. And then maybe world will move in a much better way than what it is. And even this extreme thinking, uh, they will find that it only is leading to more and more conflict and doesn't lead to peaceful coexistence. And so all this radical kind of thinking will will have to be given up, and then there will be a moderate phases in all sects, in all religions, in all uh, nations. The moderate phases will come up and they will take over, and the extremists will have to fall in line, or they just become uh, you can say uh, redundant. They just become redundant. It won't be possible for them to survive. That means the rest of the world will simply discard them or isolate them and let them to their fates, and the world will move in a more moderate way and moderate this thing. And we're already seeing this thing happening. When some of the countries we see a moderate face of Islam uh, coming out, and the radicals and extremists are not that much entertained, and so on. But artificial intelligence is going to help in all this quite a lot. Yeah. Are there many more questions, or we can stop at this point?
Yes, sir. Yeah, right.
It is a clear blue sky
The moon is shining bright, and Kishoreji's wonderful talk on love and intelligence. Sir, you have taken us into a magical world. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and sparing your valuable time and answering most of the questions. I also thank all the participants for having come here. It's quite a faraway place compared to other parts of the city, and it's being a winter already. The uh, cold is also sitting in. We thought we'll go take you for a walk to the lakeside. It is also very magical there, but maybe you have to travel long distances, go back home and all that. So I leave it to you. If anybody wants, you can go there. But there is one olive tree from Spain. It is a 500-year-old tree which has been installed there at the entrance of the uh, lake front on the other side. uh, GHMC has brought it there. It is worth seeing. I suggest that whenever you find time, please come here and have a look at it. And also, Lakeside is also very beautifully done. It's a very picturesque place. With this, I would like to conclude, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Thank you all.